Tenuous. At first, let's start with something that might feel uncomfortable for some of you. The idea that you are radiating something right now. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Attic body is producing an electromagnetic field generated by your heart, your nervous system, your brain. And that field extends beyond the boundaries of your skin. The HeartMath Institute has spent decades measuring this. Your heart alone generates an electromagnetic field that can be detected several feet away from your body. This isn't fringe science. This isn't mysticism dressed up in laboratory language. This is measurable, reproducible, peer-reviewed reality. We were taught that the self ends at the skin, that what's happening inside us, the grief we haven't processed, the joy we're carrying, the anxiety sitting in our chest, stays in here, private, contained. But the body doesn't work that way. The body is not a closed system. It is a broadcasting system. And what you broadcast is shaped profoundly by how you relate to your own emotional world. This is where the empathy becomes interesting. Because what distinguishes an empath isn't simply that they feel more, it's that they process emotional information differently. Research into sensory processing sensitivity, pioneered by psychologist Elaine Aron, suggests that roughly 15 to 20% of the population has a nervous system that is more finely tuned to subtle stimuli, environmental, social, emotional. Don't just register more information. They integrate it more deeply. They sit with it longer. They are, in a very real neurological sense, more porous to the world around them. And here's what that porosity does to a field when you are genuinely present, when you are not performing, not armoring, not dissociating from your own inner experience. Your nervous system reaches a state of coherence. HeartMath researchers use this term specifically. Cardiac coherence describes a state where the rhythms of your heart, your breath, and your brain are synchronized. And when that coherence is present, the electromagnetic field you emit becomes ordered, stable, expansive. Tick insides, it has a quality to it, not a mystical quality, a measurable quality. A field that other nervous systems, particularly those without the filters of socialization and cynicism, can detect and respond to. About what Gabor has said about the body keeping score, that our unprocessed emotional histories live in us, not just psychologically, but physiologically. Stress, trauma, suppression, these fragment the body signals. They create incoherence, and that incoherence also radiates. People can feel when someone is not quite there, when the words being spoken don't match what the body is doing. We've all had the experience of being in a room with someone who is smiling but whose presence feels somehow off. That's not intuition in some magical sense. That's your nervous system reading another nervous system's field. So when we talk about the empath sora, we are not talking about a glowing light visible only to the spiritually initiated. Twain don't the quality of a nervous system that has learned, often through deep personal struggle, to remain open, coherent, and present. That is what animals detect. That is what babies respond to before they have a single word for it. They are not reacting to your personality. They are not impressed by your credentials. They are responding to the signal your body is sending before you've said a single word. That, it cannot be faked. Now, if the body is a broadcasting system, and we've established that it is, then the question becomes, who is still capable of receiving the signal cleanly? Who hasn't yet learned to tune it out, dismiss it, or rationalize it away? Taz, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the people we so often underestimate. The ones who can't yet speak, the ones we carry in our arms and rock to sleep. Babies. Dev, profound irony embedded in human development. We spend the first years of life in a state of almost supernatural perceptual openness, and then we spend the rest of it slowly closing down, because we choose to. But because the world teaches us to, we are taught what is real and what isn't, what is worth paying attention to, and what should be dismissed. We are handed a filtered version of reality and told implicitly, persistently, that the filter is reality. Before that process begins, before language and socialization and the slow construction of the defended self, an infant is operating on pure, unmediated perception. Development, we know that newborns arrive with their mirror neuron systems already active. These are the neurons that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe that action in someone else. Daishinsu, they are the neurological basis of empathy. The reason you wince when someone else stubs their toe, the reason a yawn is contagious. In infants, this system is not yet calibrated by experience. It is wide open, extraordinarily sensitive, times at first. A baby doesn't observe your emotional state, it participates in it. The boundary between self and other, for an infant, is genuinely porous in ways that most adults have long forgotten. Practically, is that when a baby looks at you, really locks eyes with you, in that unsettling, searching way they sometimes do, they are not seeing your face in the way another adult would. They are not reading your social sea, those are parsing your body language through years of accumulated experience. They are doing something far more direct. They are feeling into the quality of your presence. Is this person regulated or dysregulated? Is this person here or somewhere else? Is this nervous system a safe harbor, or is there turbulence beneath the surface? And here is where the research becomes fascinating. Studies in developmental psychology, particularly work around the still face experiment pioneered by Edward Tronick, demonstrate just how acutely attuned infants are to emotional authenticity. Imint, a mother interacts warmly with her baby, then is instructed to go completely emotionally still, expressionless. Within seconds, the baby registers the withdrawal. It attempts to re-engage. It becomes distressed. Tick, is anything physically changed? Not because the mother left the room, but because the presence withdrew. The coherent signal went silent, and the baby felt it immediately. This is not a peripheral finding. This is central to understanding what babies are actually responding to when they gravitate toward certain people. They are not charmed by appearance. They are not responding to tone of voice alone. They are tracking something beneath all of that. The emotional groundedness, the genuine availability, the undefended openness that characterizes the empath's way of moving through the world. Time a baby in a grocery store, a stranger's child at a gathering, reaches for you, or holds your gaze longer than feels comfortable. Don't dismiss it. Don't laugh it off. It for what it is. That child is doing what the rest of us were trained to stop doing. They are telling you the truth about who you are. We've talked about the body's electromagnetic field and the extraordinary perceptual openness of infants, Bates. But now I want to turn to another kind of receiver, one that operates without the complication of language, without the interference of social expectation, and without any investment whatsoever in being polite about what it perceives. I want to talk about animals. Conversation are not a metaphor. They are evidence. Is conversation are not a metaphor. They are evidence, thousands of years living alongside animals, dogs in particular, and why that relationship has proven to be, for so many people, one of the most consistently honest relationships of their lives. It isn't sentimentality, Tejan, though we do plenty of that too. It is something more fundamental. Animals are, in the most literal sense, nervous system readers. They evolved to be. Their survival for millennia depended on their capacity to assess threat and safety not through language or logic, but through the reading of biological signals, breath rate, muscle tension, hormonal shifts in the air, the micro-movements of a body preparing to flee or attack. Toes' nose is estimated to be between 10,000 and 100,000 times more sensitive than a human's. They can detect the biochemical signatures of fear, of illness, of emotional distress. They are not guessing at your emotional state. They are measuring it. Activity extends beyond simple threat detection. Research has shown that dogs and many other animals respond differentially to human emotional states in ways that go far beyond survival instinct. They move towards sadness. They become agitated around suppressed anger. They settle into the presence of genuine calm. Now consider what this means for the empath. We established earlier that the empath's nervous system, when operating from a place of coherence and authentic presence, emits a field of measurable stability. To an animal, that signal is not subtle. It is clear. And at first, is consistent. And in a world where most human beings are walking around in various states of disconnection from their own emotional experience, performing composure while their bodies tell a different story, a genuinely coherent presence, is, for an animal, extraordinarily distinctive. It stands out the way a lighthouse stands out on a dark coastline. This is why the family dog gravitates to the one person in the room who is most emotionally present. This is why cats, famously indifferent, famously selective, choose laps with what seems like inexplicable precision. This is why horses, which are prey animals whose entire evolutionary history has depended on detecting predatory intent, will lower their heads and exhale into the hands of someone they have never met, simply because that person's nervous system is communicating something the horse recognizes as safe. Torm is built entirely on this principle, that the horse's response to a human is one of the most honest diagnostic tools we have for that person's inner emotional state. And this is where it becomes personally significant, because many empaths have spent their lives being told that they are too much, too sensitive, too intense, too attuned to things that other people insist aren't there. They have been pathologized for their perceptiveness. They have been encouraged to doubt the very faculty that makes them who they are. But the animals never doubted it. The animals walked across the room and sat down beside them without hesitation, without agenda, without the need to first consult what was socially appropriate. When an animal chooses you, it is not expressing preference. It is expressing recognition, and recognition, unlike approval, cannot be manipulated into existence. So that your body is broadcasting a signal, that babies are receiving it without filter, and that animals are reading it without agenda. Now I want to go deeper into what that signal actually contains, because it isn't simply warmth, it isn't simply calm. What the empath's field communicates at its most fundamental level is safety. And safety, in the context of human development and animal psychology, is not a soft concept. But at first, it is the most primal, most urgent biological need that any sentient creature carries. Stephen Porges, a neuroscientist whose work on polyvagal theory has quietly revolutionized how we understand human connection, identified something he called neuroception, time's unconscious process of scanning the environment for cues of safety or threat. This process happens below conscious awareness. Before you have decided whether you trust someone, your nervous system has already made its assessment. At first, it has read the micro-expressions, the vocal prosody, the postural signals, the quality of attention being directed at you, and it has rendered a verdict, safe or not safe, churved on others. What Porges discovered, and what is so critical to this conversation, is that the nervous system is not simply looking for the absence of threat. It is actively looking for the presence of safety. A person can be entirely non-threatening and still not register as safe to a dysregulated nervous system. Safety requires something more active. It requires what Porges describes as co-regulation, the experience of one nervous system being genuinely soothed and stabilized by contact with another. Don't recognize it first. This is what mothers do with infants instinctively. This is what a calm hand on a frightened shoulder accomplishes. This is what the empath, often without any conscious intention, provides simply by being present. Because the empath's field doesn't just broadcast coherence, it invites it. It communicates at a biological level that it is safe to stow, bracing, safe to exhale, safe to let the defended self rest for a moment. And for beings who are perpetually scanning, infants whose survival is entirely dependent on the emotional availability of their caregivers, animals whose nervous systems are calibrated to detect threat in every unfamiliar environment, that invitation is not merely pleasant. It is profound. It is, in the most literal, neurological sense, what they have been looking for. This is why a frightened child reaches for a stranger who happens to be an empath. This is why a rescue animal, traumatized and shut down, will sometimes open almost immediately in the presence of someone with a coherent, regulated field. It isn't magic. It is the nervous system doing precisely what it was designed to do, seeking out co-regulation the way a plant seeks light, not because it has consciously decided to, but because something in the environment has signaled that the resource is there. Serves that I think deserves to sit with you for a moment. Most empaths did not develop this capacity because their lives were easy. Sensitivity consistently points to the reality that high sensitivity often develops in environments that required it, environments where reading the emotional temperature of the room was not a personality preference, but a survival strategy. Many empaths learn to attune to others, so precisely because their own early environments were unpredictable, because safety was conditional, because they needed to know at any given moment what the adults around them were feeling. The gift, in other words, was forged in the very absence of what they now provide to others. They became safe havens because they knew from the inside what it meant to desperately need one. Talk about something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough in conversations about empathy. And that is the cost, because everything we've explored so far has been, in a sense, about the gift, the coherent field, the magnetic presence, the capacity to make infants feel seen and animals feel safe. And all of that is real. All of that matters. But if we stop there, we are only telling half the story. The kind of we're leaving out is the half we're leaving out is the half that is quietly exhausting the most sensitive people in every room. Here is the paradox that sits at the center of the empath's experience. The very openness that makes you a safe haven for others makes you extraordinarily vulnerable to what others are carrying. You are not simply radiating a signal outward. You are also receiving, constantly, causing ties, and unlike the social filters that most people develop, the unconscious mechanisms that allow them to move through a crowded room without absorbing every emotional frequency in it. DER's nervous system does not come with those default protections installed. The porosity that makes you magnetic is the same porosity that makes you permeable. And this is where the shadow side of sensitivity reveals itself with particular clarity. People don't recognize at first because it is not only regulated. Peaceful, dysregulated ones are too. Animals in distress, children in pain, tanks of prast, adults carrying grief they have never named, anger they have never metabolized, longing they have never allowed themselves to feel fully. They gravitate toward the empath, not just because the empath feels safe, but because, at some level, beneath conscious awareness, they sense that this person has the capacity to hold what they are carrying, and they are not wrong. Daft often can hold it. The tragedy is that they frequently do so, without realizing it is happening without consent, and without any mechanism for putting it back down afterward. Gabor speaks often about the way that sensitivity, the suppression of self become entangled in early development. When a child grows up in an environment where their own emotional needs are secondary, where attunement to others is rewarded and self-assertion is not, they learn a devastating substitution. They've learned to outsource their sense of safety to the emotional states of the people around them. They become extraordinarily good at making others feel better, because making others feel better is what made them feel safer. Pattern, carried into adulthood, is not empathy in its healthiest form. It is empathy in the absence of boundaries, and that distinction is everything. Because a boundary, in this context, is not a wall. It is not the withdrawal of presence, or the shutting down of sensitivity. A boundary is the capacity to remain in full contact with another person's experience without losing contact with your own. Fast, it is the ability to say, at a nervous system level, I can feel what you are feeling, and I am still here, and I am still me. That is not a small thing to cultivate. For someone whose entire developmental history taught them that their own inner experience was less important than everyone else's, learning to maintain that dual awareness, present to you, present to myself, can feel like learning to walk again after years of being carried. The empath who has not developed this capacity doesn't just get tired, they get depleted in ways that accumulate invisibly until the body begins to speak the language that the self was never permitted to. Chronic fatigue, autoimmune conditions, that arrives without a traceable source. The body, as always, keeps the score. Close to that, if you recognize yourself in this, if you know what it is to leave a social gathering feeling as though you've been turned inside out, to absorb a stranger's mood in an elevator, to lie awake processing emotions that you entirely sure belong to you, then understand this clearly. The problem is not your sensitivity. The problem is the absence of a container strong enough to hold it. Your openness is not the wound. The lack of boundaries around it is. Here is the expanded segment for key point 6. Turing distance together in this conversation. We began with the science of electromagnetic fields and the reality that your body is broadcasting something measurable, something real, into every room you enter. Till we moved through the extraordinary perceptual openness of infants, the unfiltered honesty of animals, the neuroscience of safety and co-regulation, and the very real cost of carrying a sensitivity that the world has never quite known how to honor. And now we arrive at the place where all of that has been pointing, not toward a diagnosis, not toward a framework for managing your sensitivity as though it were a liability, but towards something far more important than either of those things, toward ownership. Because here's what I have observed, both in the research and in the lived experience of sensitive people across cultures and contexts. The empath's greatest struggle is rarely the sensitivity itself. And at first, it is the shame around it. It is the decades of accumulated messaging that told you your perceptiveness was a problem. Your emotional depth was inconvenient. Your attunement to others was weakness, dressed up as caring. Tonalized verdict of a culture that has historically rewarded performance over presence, productivity over attunement, and certainty over the kind of nuanced, layered awareness that the sensitive person carries as naturally as breathing. So many empaths have responded to that verdict the only way that felt survivable. They made themselves smaller, they'd add, for noticing things others didn't notice. They laughed off the stares of animals and babies as coincidence, as projection, as anything other than what it actually was. Confirmation. As anything other than what it actually was? Confirmation. Confirmation that something in them was real and recognizable and worth moving toward. The animals knew. The babies knew. And somewhere beneath all the condition and doubt, the empath knew too. They just didn't yet have the language or the permission to trust it. This is what I want to offer now. Not a technique, not a 5-step protocol for optimizing your sensitivity, but permission to understand your emotional attunement, not as a burden you have learned to manage, but as a form of intelligence. One that is as legitimate, as sophisticated, and as necessary as any other form of human knowing. Totality of multiple intelligences expanded our understanding of what it means to be smart. He argued, compellingly, that intelligence is not a single capacity measured on a single axis. It is plural, it is contextual, torsional, and intrapersonal intelligence, the capacity to read others and to know oneself with depth and precision are as real and as valuable as mathematical or linguistic intelligence. That their most developed is operating at the highest levels of both, but development is the operative word, because sensitivity without self-awareness is simply reactivity. Empathy without boundaries is simply enmeshment. The gift only becomes fully itself when it is held consciously, when the empath has done enough of their own inner work to distinguish between what they are feeling and what they are absorbing, between genuine compassion and compulsive caretaking, between being present for someone and disappearing into them. That work is not comfortable. It requires sitting with the parts of yourself that your sensitivity developed to protect you from seeing. T would say, the willingness to turn toward your own pain with the same quality of presence you so readily offer to everyone else. To everyone else. Prize. When the empath finally extends to themselves the compassion they have always extended outward, something shifts. The field doesn't diminish. It deepens. It deepens. Time signs. The presence doesn't contract. It becomes more sustainable, more grounded, more genuinely available to the people and creatures that have always been drawn to it. The animals were never wrong about you, Dervascues. The babies were never wrong about you. The only one who ever doubted what they already knew was you.